What is up? Daniel here with the Virtual Robotics Studio, and we are now on Team 302's practice field. And we got to give an extra special shout out to Bruce Stone and the rest of Team 302 because it's like 5 days after kickoff, and they've been just building these field components and getting them set up so we can film this as early as possible so we can get the video to you as early as possible. So we've got our robot out here. We do have to, I think, mark the starting line, that tape line. I think this tape line is slightly off. This is a leftover tape line from before, so we will have to mark the starting line. But then we'll be able to start testing our auto mode here on the practice field element. And again, these elements you can build yourself. There are plans to build these from first. So if you need something to practice with and you've got a little bit of extra money to be able to buy some of the wood and PVC pipe, you can put this together. Also, since this robot is not going to be scoring on any of the higher level stuff, you really just need that bottom shelf. So it's a pretty simple build if you're just kind of building that and enough to support it. So we're going to do that auto mode, then we're going to drive around. We're going to practice loading, practice scoring with the controls, see if we need to tweak anything in our code, and just get a good feel for how to run this robot and how to get the most out of it. And then we'll talk a little bit about some of the other aspects of the field and things you might be able to upgrade on this robot. But before we get started with that, we're going to give another special thanks to Argosy for making this all possible, to First and Andymark for parts and support, and to Team 302, Lake Orion High School, for hosting our studio. All right, so we have the reef here and our scoring little level 1 shelf. And we know from this surface to the starting line, the start of the starting line, the near side of the starting line, is 88 inches. So let's go ahead and mark that out on the field so we're sure we're starting in the right place. So right against that, all the way to, well, 88 is farther than I thought. OK, 88 inches is right here. So we'll get a starting line for ourselves. I think this might be the wrong color. I think it might supposed to be a black line. I'm not sure. But it's not going to hurt anything because we're not doing anything with the color of the line. All right, so right about there. So I guess this tape line is almost in the right place. All right. And that should be enough. We don't need, it goes across the whole field, but we don't need that for our testing. You wouldn't need that for your testing if you were just setting up wherever you have a chunk of carpet. And I will say, when you're trying to run your robot, again, if you can visit a full field, that's the best option. But if you can just get a big chunk of carpet and one of these field elements, you can do a lot of this testing as well that way. OK, let's get the robot turned on. I guess since I'm out here, I might as well line it up on the starting line, too. So there are a couple different ways that you can work on to line this up. One of them is you can actually go all the way to where you want the robot to end auto mode, right? And then you can try to roll it straight back from there until you get to your distance. And ours, well, mine in this case, was putting each wheel right on the edge of the tape line. So something like that. That sort of guarantees that I'm straight into that. You can also just line it up here and kind of get down and use something that you can sight with. All right, hopefully that was enough time for it to boot. Let's jump on the computer. And we have to, let's open the code up. So that's going to be our 2025 WPI Live VS code. And this should already have our code open, because it's the last thing I did, and I haven't done anything else with it. But again, remember, if you need to reopen it, you do File, Open Folder, and then find that folder. All right, and here is our auto mode. So this is center coral. So this is the code we're going to be looking at and tweaking. And then, of course, we also need to run the driver station. So go ahead and run your FRC driver station here. And I don't have any gamepads plugged in because I'm just testing auto mode. We'll get to the gamepads and teleop testing afterwards. All right, and we'll give that a second to run. I feel like the driver station always takes just long enough to do something that I think I didn't click on it, and then it pops up. So there it is. All right, driver station, no robot communication. Let's double check that we are on the wireless network for the robot. We are not. So I'm going to connect to that. And there we go. We have communication, we have code, a good battery. I will say, too, one of the things to keep in mind when you're doing this is make sure you have a fresh battery, because auto mode is going to start at the beginning of a match, presumably on a fully charged battery as well. Okay, I do have to load a coral piece here into the robot. So we'll drop that in. And you might want to, like during the match, obviously it should work no matter how it falls in. But in auto mode, since we can take our time to sort of like perfectly align it, you might find a place where it works a little better. And take your time to just do that adjustment. I'm going to make sure it's touching all of the wheels here for this test. OK, I think we're ready. So we're going to just go ahead and choose autonomous mode. And on our smart dashboard, center and coral. And let's run this thing. Let's see how it goes. All right, 3, 2, 1, and enable. OK, that worked pretty well. It did stick right against the edge, but we did end up pushing this back a few inches. And the competition one definitely won't move. So let's see. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drag this other one back. We'll move this back into position later, but I'm going to drag these other two back just so they're holding it in place so it won't move, just in case. And what I'm looking for here is I want to know if this is really not going to move, does the robot bounce off of it and create a gap when we go to try to score? That's what we're looking out for. If you obviously don't have all three or multiple of these there, you can just get something else heavy behind there, or probably even have a student down there with their feet against it, right? And that's going to add a bunch of weight to stop it from moving, obviously on the other side. Let's disable the robot and line it back up. And I kind of can't stress this enough. No matter how you build your auto mode, no matter what sensors you use, if your robot does not start in exactly the same place, facing exactly the same direction, your auto mode is not going to be repeatable. So you have to make sure that you start always in the same place. OK, let's try it again. And 3, 2, 1, enable. It seems pretty good to me. It is spitting the coral out kind of hard, but it doesn't look like it has a chance of missing. Let's run it one more time just to be sure. Of course, when you're doing this, right, like it might work once, but if it doesn't work consistently, it doesn't count. We need to make sure that the robot is able to score pretty much every single time. Bring it back. The more I do this, the more I think maybe lining up the back of the bumper with the edge of the line would have made more sense. But you can always tweak your thing to drive a little bit less forward and do that. So again, it did slide about, I don't know, less than an inch this time. All right, and you can see this is kind of a weird way that fell in. So I'm going to adjust it and make sure it's nice and clean. And let's just run it one more time and see if it does the same thing, which is what we would expect it to do. All right, 3, 2, 1. OK, and clearly the roller spins way too long. We could change that if we wanted to. But I'm not going to worry about it because, again, I'm most focused on making sure the coral piece gets ejected. It seems like the speed was good. I mean, every single one went in and stayed there. When we do driver practice, we're going to get to dump a bunch more into the bin. So we'll have a better idea of, do we need to tweak that speed, that 0.44 speed that we had set before. I do think, let's add one more thing here to this auto mode. So the first thing that we're going to want to do after we score here, as soon as the match starts, right? As soon as the match starts, we probably are going to want the robot to either go to a human player station to get more coral pieces or cross the field to play defense. Either way, we might not be facing the way we want, especially if we want to go to the feeder station. So another thing that we can do, and what I'm thinking too in my mind is in auto mode, right? There'll be one robot in the middle going forward and doing this. There will be 2 more robots on the sides going in to score on the side positions, and then maybe trying to go load more. So if you're in the middle, you want to make sure you don't move out into the way of other people. But we can save a little bit of time getting back there by backing up a little bit and then making a turn so that the loading side of our robot is sort of facing the direction we want to go. So then it's more streamlined to immediately start going back there to load another one. So let's go ahead and try to add just that extra step to this auto mode. Just since the first part took basically no tweaking, I think we can try to add a little bit more here to make it just a little bit more useful for us. So we'll go ahead and line it up. Looks good. All right, and then let's jump into our code here. Disable and jump into the code. And if you remember, so this is drive to the reef. This is our delay. Well, this is like wait 1.15 seconds for everything to settle to a stop. Then we spit the coral out. And then after we spit the coral out, this is where we would want to add our backup, and then we'll add one more turn afterwards. So every time we're adding a new case, basically you can copy this whole section here and then paste it down below. And we just have to change the time, we'll change the comment, and we'll change what's happening. So in this case, this is going to be back up a little bit, and like a little bit. So let's back up for like half a second. Let's go to 6 seconds. So from 5.5 to 6 is half a second. And our roller should be turned off at this point. And our speeds should be negative. So we're going to do negative point. I'm going to go, I guess let's stick with 0.5. Let's stick with 0.5. We could go a little slower, a little faster. Again, we're only at 6 seconds in auto mode. And we have 15 total to use, so we have plenty of time here. All right, let's deploy this. I like doing one step at a time, so we're going to deploy this code. We still have our else case, which turns everything off at the very end, so that's good. And let's see, we're already lined up. We're ready to go. So as soon as this runs, we can go ahead and see how far our backup is. I went from 0 right to 100%. All right. I wonder why sometimes it takes longer than others. I don't know. All right, we're almost there. OK, looks good. Let's close the real log. All right, and still on center and coral, still on autonomous. Let's go ahead and run it. This time, we should expect to see it go forward, score, and then back up a little bit at the very end. Let's see what happens. Ooh. All right, looks like we did not back up quite enough. It started backing up, but we didn't get there. So, all right, let's double check our code and make sure our backup was set right. I will just reset the robot since I'm out here. OK. Let's check. Oh, OK. And you can see I did minus 0.5 and 0.5 for the backup. It needed to be minus 0.5 and minus 0.5. That's why it looked like it was trying to turn a little bit. And we learned nothing else, I guess. We just have to rebuild, because since I did not put the right numbers in, we don't know if it backed up enough or not. So we'll just rebuild quickly. And again, I think this one will probably go faster. Yeah. And we'll wait for that real log to pop up and close it. All right, autonomous, center, and coral, we are lined up. All right, so here we go, 3, 2, 1. OK, I'd say that's about perfect. That's about exactly where I want it to back up to. And so now we're going to try to make basically a 90-degree turn. I'm going to keep an eye on this, though. That time, I don't know if you saw it, but when it spit that one out, it went and it bounced up on here, and it got to something like this before it fell back in. So we might be just on the upper end in terms of how much speed we want these rollers to have when they're dumping stuff out. But it hasn't missed yet. If it's not missing, I mean, that's good. So I'm not going to adjust it until we actually have a problem. I'm not going to invent problems. All right, let's set it, restart it. OK. And we have one more case now that we have to make. So we'll disable the robot. And we need one more case here. So I'm just going to copy the last one we did from the else if to the close curly bracket, paste it in. And this one is going to be turn about 90 degrees. Actually, if we turn slightly more than 90 degrees, about 90 degrees. And this time, we want the robot to, let me think about it. So the robot needs to turn this way to face that loading station, or this way it would face that loading station. So I guess it doesn't matter which way we turn, but I'm going to make it turn this way, which means I need the left motor to go forward and the right motor to go backwards. So in our code, we can do left motor positive, right motor negative, and how long do we think this is going to take? I think it's going to take, let's start with 6.5. Let's try another half second here and see what happens. All right, let's deploy it. Make sure we're set up. Yeah, robot looks good. And OK, double check we're on the right auto in autonomous mode. All right, let's see what this does. 3, 2, 1, enable. OK, we learned some things. Thing number one, we finally missed. So I am going to tweak that power value down. And we turned, what would you say? That's about halfway. That was about 45 degrees. So we want to turn for about twice as long. So we can update both of those things, and then we'll run it again. Also, I do think we are approaching the point where I need to reset this. We moved it back almost 2 inches now from our repeatedly crashing into it. All right, so back to the starting point. But remember, we do want to make sure there's no gap. So I think driving a little bit too far forward and pushing it back is a good thing. You know what? I'll move the other ones after we update our code here while it's building. OK, so first things first, that turn was about half as much. So from 6 to 6.5 seconds was not long enough. We're going to go from 6 to 7 seconds. That is twice as long. We'll see how that looks. And then, if you remember, we use this roller eject value because we use it in auto mode. You're going to use it perhaps in multiple auto modes, hopefully. We use it in teleop. So instead of having to change that value everywhere, if we scroll all the way, OK, not all the way to the top, mostly to the top, we have our roller eject value, which is this 0.44. I'm going to turn it down just a little bit, maybe to 0.40, and see how it goes. Now, this number, for sure, is going to be robot dependent. So I have a slightly different motor. I have probably slightly different amounts of friction, how big my spacers were, how much things are wedged together, how new my grip tape is, the gaff tape that we put on the bottom here. All these things can have an effect on it. So just because I needed to change this number doesn't mean that you will also have to change this number. OK, so that's changed. Our auto mode is updated. Let's go ahead and deploy it. And while that's deploying, I'm going to get these things back in to try to help hold it in place. All right, looks good. Let's get this thing centered. OK, close the real log. Autonomous, center, and coral. We are ready to go. Let's do this. And 3, 2, 1, enable. Technically, still scored, but I am worried that this is still too much power. It's bouncing around a lot in there. I wonder why it hit the first 5 times, and now we've had 2 in a row where there have been some issues. OK, so this turn, though, that's about perfect. We're right in position to start arcing our way around and heading to load. So I think we worked out the extra auto mode steps, but let's run it again with a slightly lower, and actually let's change the code first, then I'll set the robot up. But let's do a slightly lower roller eject value again. So that was 4.0. Let's try 0.35. And let's see what happens there. So I'm going to get this building, or deploying rather. And while that deploys, I'm going to set the robot up. Of course, if you have multiple people on your team, this is a good chance for your programmers to stay at the computer, and other people who are waiting for something to do can be setting the robot up every time. You should try to have somebody that's going to be on your field team set the robot up. So when you go out to the field, right, you're allowed 2 drivers, which have to be pre-college students, 1 human player also, and there's a technician and a coach. I think the coach and the technician, one of them can be an adult, and the rest have to be students. But those are the only people who will be able to set the robot up on the field. So if you have like 2 programmers, and they spent all their time knowing how to line the robot up, but they're not on your field crew, they're not drivers, they're not the coach, then they need to teach somebody else how to line the robot up. So during all of this autonomous practice, if one of those other people doesn't have a lot to do, just practicing to set the robot up can be helpful. All right, we are deployed, of course, so let's test this new roller value here. Autonomous and enable. That seems a little better, and the rest of the auto mode still worked. I'm going to do this auto mode one more time, because we just did the turn twice where it worked. I want to see it at least 3 times in a row working. And then I do think we will get a chance to further tune in the roller speed when we do driver control, because we're going to be able to spit a bunch of things out there and see how it goes. So let's set this up. We're going to make no changes. So I'm just going to disable the robot. We're going to make no changes. We're just going to set it back up and try it again. And since this is sort of like a final test situation, I am going to move the goals back exactly into place as well. Let's make sure we're on the edge of the line on both sides. Looks good. And I will bring this all the way back up to the very edge of that tape line. And move these other ones to block it as much as I can. All right. Let's do this. Autonomous, center, and coral in 3, 2, 1. Here we go. So that's 3 times in a row. It ended at almost exactly the same angle. I'm very happy with that. I think this auto mode is completely done. I also did like that new speed. It still hits, it still bounces around, but it doesn't feel quite as scary. Another thing we're going to test later when we start driving is like what happens when you spit one out and there's already one there. So that might need a slightly different speed as well. So we'll test that. OK, but this auto mode is done. Our other auto mode, let's test our other auto mode, which can literally start anywhere. If you remember, the other auto mode we did was just drive forward. So as long as some part of the robot is on the line, I don't really care. I would still start with a coral in your robot, because why not? It's free. And let's switch to just drive here on our smart dashboard. And this one should just drive forward a little bit. This shouldn't even make it all the way to the goal in the middle. So we'll disable autonomous and enable. 3, 2, 1, just drive. Perfect. So that was an easy one. Definitely get off the line, get those 3 points, even if you can't score. But remember, if all 3 robots can leave the line and score a piece of coral, you get that ranking point. And ranking points are absolutely huge. So make sure you get at least scoring the center one dialed in. But now, let's think about this. What if you're on 3 people, there are 3 people on your team, and everybody only does this auto mode? You can't start here and do this auto mode because they have to. Well, if you have time and you have the space to practice this, you should definitely then say, OK, well, let's do another auto mode where our robot starts on the side here on the line, probably farther over even. And the idea now is it'll drive forward, and that goal doesn't really exist, but I'll move this one close to where it's going to be, right? So then we can drive forward and go in to this side. So to do this auto mode, you'll have to drive forward a bit and then make a turn and then drive forward again and then spit out And everything else can be the same. Then you could actually back up and maybe turn this way so you're ready to load another piece of coral as soon as driver control starts. So my recommendation is definitely to dial this one in first, and when you're comfortable with that center scoring one, pick a side. Pick the right side or the left side and dial that one in. Work on that one. It's just drive forward, turn, drive forward, and then spit. Well, I would use the wait as well because we still have 15 seconds. So basically, once you're in the position to drive straight forward, it's the same auto mode that we already did. You're just adding a drive forward and turn before. And if you get that working on one side, the other side is the same thing, except the turn goes in the other direction. So you should be able to get those 3 auto modes working. And then, no matter who your partners are when you go out to a match, there should be a good spot for you to set up to get off the line and get your piece of coral scored so you can contribute not only 6 points to the match, but your portion of that ranking point. OK, that looks good. So I think we're set for auto mode. Let me go set up in the driver station. And let's practice human loading this robot and scoring while driving. So I am now back here in the driver station. This is another benefit to if you can visit somebody that has a full field setup. And again, I know there are a lot of them around, but you might be very remote and there's nobody near you. That's OK if you can't. But one of the things you'll learn by being back here in the driver station of a real field is what sight lines are going to look like. Sometimes it's hard to see some parts of the field. We have this big structure in the middle. We're going to have the hanging chains and stuff coming down with the cages in the middle of the field as well, which is going to block vision. So all of those things are good to get used to, especially for your drivers. But let's go ahead and start our driver practice testing. Our teleoperated testing. So I'm going to switch to teleoperated mode. I plugged both of my game pads in here. Let me go down to the USB tab. And if you remember, I have one that has the red tape on it. This should be my driver joystick. So if I hit a button, I'm hoping that controller 0 blinks. And right now, controller 1 is blinking. That means my joysticks got flipped around. So I'm going to drag controller 1 up to controller 0. And now I'm going to press, again, on the one with the red tape. This should be 0, and now it is 0. OK, and let's test the other one. So this is my second controller that has no tape. This should be my operator gamepad. And that is showing up as gamepad 1. So that's perfect. All right, we are ready to go then. Let's enable the robot. So back to the operation tab, and we'll enable in teleoperated. And the first thing I'm going to do is just get a feel for driving the robot around a little bit. So if you remember, this is arcade drive, so forward and backwards on the left joystick. Remember, it is very fast. And we kind of are working in a small corner area here. So I don't know if we need all of this speed. And then the right joystick to do our turns. And this is kind of what I was talking about when we were in the other area. Like when I'm coming back to load, I've got to get that angle pretty good to where when we park here, it's going to be lined up. And there are multiple stations here. And so getting lined up, let me try to line up on this close one, is not the easiest thing in the world when, first of all, you're driving backwards to yourself, but also it just moves very fast. So even here, I'm kind of lined up, I'm kind of flat in now. Let's see if that's enough room to be able to load this in. So yes, there is enough room to kind of move over. And this is not the official loading station, but it is similar. So you'll have some additional learning curve that you can do there. But if I line up here and I drop this down, is it going to go into the robot? Yes, but now we have to learn what happens when it goes in on an angle like this. Are we able to score it or not? So I'm actually going to go to, remember we have the speed, half speed mode. I'm going to go to half speed mode here because I don't want to smash this front thing too much. But we're going to line up. We're going to drive in and try to get flat on it. And you can, when you're doing this in the competition, right, you can bang into this a little bit because that's a big, sturdy structure. So if you hit it, you don't want to hit it super hard because if you hit it super hard, it could mess up your robot or where the coral is stuck in your robot. But if you hit it a little bit, that's fine. It's not going to, it's not going to move. All right, so we're in position. Let's try to spit it out. And the A button was our specific speed, our roller. What did we call it? Roller eject value speed. So I'm going to hit that, and let's see if this sticks. OK, not bad. So that was sideways, and it still worked fine. Let's come back and try to load again. This 0.5 speed might be a little bit too slow. All right, let's try to line up on this middle one here. All right, but now let's say I am on an angle, And so the bumper's hitting, and I'm off center like this. I'm not all the way in. So there's a little bit of a gap on this side here. And the question is, does it still load if I try to roll it down this way, or does it not? Is there a chance that it misses? Especially like if I drop it close, it's going to have less speed. So I don't know if that's going to make it. So you got to watch out for that. Let me go get my coral pieces back here. Now, the human player does have the ability to kind of toss these however they want through this opening. So if I hold it up high and drop it, we're going to have much more speed. So maybe it can make it over that gap. Still cannot make it over the gap. Interesting. Let's drop another one. This one, if I push it forward to give it even more speed, that kind of works, but I wasn't super comfortable with that. That bounced around a little bit. Let's grab these back out. Let's do some more testing here in our suboptimal position of alignment. Something else that's interesting that might help us out is dropping the tube this way instead of rolling it in. Since we learned that that still spit out and it's still scored, what this is going to do is it's going to be able to slide out farther before it starts tipping down. So if I do this, and especially if I aim at the corner that's close, that goes in nice and cleanly. I'm actually pretty happy with that. If I do that on the bad corner, though, that's still going to be a problem. So these are some good lessons to know, especially for whoever is going to be your human player, because the driver needs to kind of get as close as they can in park, and you need to know, is this a good enough position to score or to load or not? And what a lot of human players will do is if it's good enough and they think they can make it, then they go for it. If they don't think it's good enough, then they can signal like, oh, you got to turn this way, or you got to get closer. And you can also, because your drivers are right here, you can also, reach around, stand around the corner and yell at them that it's not in the right spot. The good news is, like, if you are this driver station, you can see really well whether it's going to go or not. But let's try again. So if I aim for the corner that's like sort of lined up and I drop it long ways, that feels like it's going to go in every time. So our question now is just, we only tried to score once when the tube was sort of in a weird position like this. So let's try that a few times, and let's see if it scores every time. Because we don't want to learn a loading technique that doesn't let us score consistently. All right, let's go back, make sure we're enabled, and let's go ahead and drive over to the spot, and then let's spit it out. OK, yep, that was fine. Let's come back and get another one. And again, I'm going to park badly. This is very badly. Let's see if that long way on the tube can still make it in. And I think it will. It looks OK. Yeah, I gave it just a tiny push there. Obviously, this one fell the way I didn't want to test. But you know what we haven't tested is scoring when there's already a coral piece there. So let's try that. All right, so we're going to go right over. Yeah, it's fast when you're at full speed, especially in the small corner. Actually, I got to move over a little bit more so we have a chance. Now, of course, if it falls off the left-hand edge here, there is another shelf. This is a continuous hexagonal shelf that goes all the way around. So if it falls off the left-hand side after it looked like it was settled in, we count that. All right, let's try it. Oh, OK. Guess what? We maybe have found a problem. OK, I'm going to put this one more towards the middle. And I will drag this sort of back out onto the line here. And I'm going to sacrifice the other two for a minute and use them to just try to keep it from moving as much for a little bit. And we'll put these back when we want to try using them. OK, so what happened there was the second one came in, and it didn't have enough speed to go over the top. So it hit it and then fell down. And this might mean we have to turn our roller speed back up. In fact, we might need a different speed in autonomous than in the rest of the match. Because in autonomous, the slower speed seemed to be better to guarantee a score. But if during the match, the higher speed, maybe it misses occasionally, but it lets you score in an area that already has stuff, that's going to be important. But before we do anything, let's test it a few more times. Another thing I'm seeing just as we go through this practice, and let's try doing this one let's try doing this one that way again. But as I'm doing this practice, I'm noticing that we have a very, very, very clean, like, repeated cycle. So if you can line up on one of these driver station walls, you drive forward, you spit it out, you back straight up, almost straight up. There's not a lot of turning needed. Load another one, drive straight forward. So we're just moving forward and backwards. What is this, about 3, 6, maybe 10 feet? 10 feet forward, 10 feet backwards. And you can fill up that near shelf. Then the other ones are going to take a little more time because you got to make some turns to get around the corner. All right, let's test if we can score where there already is one. And I'm taking some time. Like, obviously, you're not going to take your time being this precise, but I want to be right on it for this test. All right, let's try. That is not happening. The good news is it is not getting stuck inside our robot. The bad news is it's not scoring. Let's try. I'm just going to reload this and keep the robot right here. Let's try. If you remember, we had manual control on that joystick or on that gamepad, which was the trigger buttons that I just pressed on accident. And those will let us use different speeds. So what I'm going to try to do now is basically I'll hit that at full speed, and we'll see if it goes or not. And that'll let us know if a higher speed even has a chance. OK, so we do full speed on our deploy here. OK, full speed definitely works. Interesting. I wonder what. Let's try adjusting our value that we spit out just to see if there's a value that works that's not full speed. So let's jump back into our code. Let's disable the robot and jump into our code here. And we have this eject value. I'm going to do a comment here, which is 0.35 was really good for auton/empty shelf. So now the number is sort of saved. And then I'm going to change this number. And let's say, so it was 0.44 when we started this whole thing. Does 0.44, for example, give us enough juice to score when there is another piece there? I'm actually not sure. Let's deploy and find out. And what I'm starting to think here is we might actually want to have like the A button be that slow speed deploy that you use if the shelf is empty. And then maybe we use the B button to do a full power deploy if there's something else on the shelf. And then we would still have the manual control if needed. All right, we are running. New code is in. Teleop enabled. And I'm going to hit that A button now. So this should go out at 0.44 instead of 0.35 speed. Ooh, it's close, though. It like knocked the other one out of the way, but it didn't have quite enough juice to actually sink it. Let's jump it up again. Let's go to 0.55. And I'll go ahead and deploy that code again. And while that's running, I'll reload the Coral. So I guess there are two ways. We're starting to see there are two ways that this could work. It could shoot into this and maybe be able to push it up and drop in. Or it can go out fast enough that it hits the top and it rolls over and drops in. And it seems like maybe both of those are possible, although we only saw the dropping over the top work. All right, we should be deployed at this point. Indeed we are. Let us re-enable the robot. And I'm going to hit the A button. So this should be 0.55 power now. I'm starting to wonder if this is if there's any power that we're comfortable with. Let's go to 0.7 and deploy that. While it's deploying, we'll go reset. We are approaching the point where, if you remember, 0.44 had a few misses for us in auto mode. I think we ran auto mode. It's like 5 times. Then we had a questionable one. Then we had a miss. So that's like not a great percentage. So I don't know if we're speeding up to 0.7 or whatever I'm at now, if it's smart for that to be our normal deploying value, because that might be too many misses on an empty shelf. So this is starting to make me think that we're going to go back to the 0.35 and create another high power release for if stuff is on the shelf. Let's find out how this one goes. All right, teleop enabled, and let's hit that A button. OK, so that worked. I don't know how close that was to not working, but that worked. Let's try a few now on the empty shelf with this speed and see if any of them miss. Especially if, that's another thing we want to test, if you're not all the way against this, if you're on a little bit of an angle, what values do we still need to have work? But let's try this with our high speed value and see what it does on an empty shelf. All right, let's run it. I'm thinking right off the bat that's probably not a good sign. Let me actually put my gamepad up here. Now I don't have to walk around off the field. Because I definitely want to run this a few times. All right, we'll drop another one in. And I'm going to hit that A button again. OK, well, that's 2 for 2 misses. So that's not a good sign. Let's get these out. Let's try one more time. And let's try, what if it's in this way and we use the very high speed? All right, here we go. So that works. And then, again, if one is already there, seems good if one is already there. And again, let's go back to nothing is there. OK, so it works if you're lined up on, if it's lined up on any of the, I don't know, the upper level, the higher levels of the reef structure. It has a chance of bouncing off of those and staying in. But I'm not sure if that's like something I want to rely on. Let's go back to the middle and see. Yeah, it's I don't know that I like that speed for normal deployment. So let's go ahead and adjust our code to have our 2 options for output power. And of course, we'll still have the manual option always available to us. All right, so disable, go back to our code. We're going to make roller eject value 0.35. Actually, I guess I'll leave the note here, and we'll just send it back to 0.35. And let's duplicate this line of code and make another value. And paste it. And this is going to be like roller eject value hard for when there is already a game piece there. And 0.7 seemed pretty good for that. So this is 7 is a pretty good speed power for when a coral piece is already on the shelf. And then let's go down to our teleoperated mode here. Teleop periodic. So if you remember, we have if A button is pressed, set the value to this. Else, use the manual control. What we're going to do is go in between the if and the else, and we're going to add an else if. And in this case, it's going to be if gamepad 1. And again, if you're doing it all on one gamepad, use gamepad 0. Dot get B button is pressed. Then we're going to set our roller value, our roller out, to be equal to roller eject value hard. So now if we press A, it will use our nice soft drop off, which is great. If we press B, it will use this harder one that works when there's already a coral piece there. Or if all else fails, we can still use the triggers to control it at whatever speed, hopefully whatever speed we want. All right, let's deploy this code. I did click it. Okay, it just took a second. All right. Meanwhile, I guess we're set up already. I already have a piece here. One of the things also that I'm noticing is these wheels are getting very, very dirty. They're picking up sawdust and plastic bits and all kinds of things. It might be worth it to clean these off. You can just do like a wet rag or a paper towel and clean them off. Because if they get too dirty, they might not grip the PVC. And if they're slipping when they go to move this, if it slips at all, it's going to change the speeds as well. So keeping them clean or keeping them in a consistent state is going to be good also to make sure that your tuned values stay working. All right, where are we here? Looks good. All right, so we're going to enable in teleoperated mode. And we'll start with the A button. So the A button should be the nice and gentle drop off that always works for 1. And it is. And then let's come back here. And let's load a second one. OK, we got a weird load, a weird direction there. Also, while I'm going, if the tube ends up this way, what happens if I try to spin the robot to make it fall flat? OK, nothing. But what happens if I run the rollers backwards and do the same thing? OK, so if you need to get it flat, if you find out that when it's pointing down, when it's vertical in the chute, if you find out that that is causing problems, there are a few things you can do. One of them is to run the rollers backwards to keep it like kind of bouncing up. And then when you start moving, when you start turning, you have the ability to control it. Also, we learned from before, if you back up, you can get that rolling back up the chute. Now, this is more dangerous because if you do it too hard, you could lose it. But you could pop it up and then try to do a turn, when it's up there. And now I got it sort of caught back in a halfway position. I think the best way seems to be bouncing it around works. I think using the roller backwards seems to be the best way to get it sort of back where you can have it nice and flat. All right, now we're going to pull up. And I'm going to try to get flat for this attempt. Pretty flat. OK, and let's try the hard button now, which is the B button, to hopefully spit it out fast enough that it sticks. Ooh, OK. There might be more to this scoring when there's already something there than we thought. Let's do another test. Actually, you know what it might be is right now, I do have a gap here. I didn't quite pull it perfectly in. If we pull it perfectly in, what happens? It might be that that 0.7 is still too low. All right, let's use the B button. Or maybe it's still too high. Very interesting. OK. Let's load up again. And because we don't have the other side of the shelf, let me just move both of these over towards the middle a little bit more. So we have sort of the correct amount of shelf space here. And can I get this controller? Oh, no, I don't think I can. That was totally worth the effort. All right, let's press the B button. OK, so yeah, it kind of works when it's in the middle. It works less well when it's on the very edge. But it's hard for us to test the edge, right? Because there is another shelf going this way that might help it out. So that power seems OK. But now our next problem is, what if we aren't all the way in? So let's manufacture a gap here, right? So this kind of gap is going to be pretty common. We've got, I don't know, about a 1-tube width wedge between it and the shelf. What's going to happen if we try to do our normal low power score here? Ooh, maybe a little weak. We might then want to tweak that low power up just a tiny bit so we have a little bit more of a range. Let's try it again, though. It's very close to working. That's not too bad, actually. But then also, if we're off like this, what happens if we try the high power? That seems also like a good option, especially if we were even a little bit farther off. So knowing like, oh man, we're on a very big angle. Let's try high power. Does it work? Yeah. OK, so I think that's the key, too, is if there's something already there, or if you didn't get nice and flat against the surface, you might want to use that higher power release. Let's do a test now if it's this way. And let's try low power first. Low power on that one did something interesting. I don't know if you caught it. Let's try again. So it is not powerful enough. I think there was a small stutter the first time. And I don't know if that's because I didn't push the button cleanly or if because, let's go right on the center point. This is sort of the most squished, the hardest to deploy. Oh, no, it's working. OK. I thought maybe we were getting close to stalling the motor and needing to increase the power for that reason, but it seems fine. So if we're this far away, low power is not going to get the job done. Let's try high power. OK, that was fun. And maybe, because it went like this, and it might have landed on this shelf, but it might have bounced off. So that's maybe not the best either. Let's try again, long ways with high power here. I think that one sticks. I think that one would have stuck if there was the other side of this stuff. Let's try one more time. OK, so let's sum up our lessons here. What I think we've learned is that long ways works, but is less reliable and prone to doing weird stuff sometimes. This way, where it rolls in, seems to be more consistent, is very, very good when you're flat against the edge and you use the low power mode. That seems to be almost 100%, which makes sense because we tuned that in auto to be the best possible value. So when you have an empty shelf, I think we want to try to get the roller in this way if possible and get nice and flat and lined up. Now, if you're over at the human player station and you drop it in and it ends up a little bit crooked, I don't think it's worth it, especially on an empty shelf. I don't think it's worth it to spend 5 seconds spinning the robot around to try to get it to move when there's still a pretty good chance it goes on this way. Right? So we tested that. I think both low and high power, if you're right against it and it's empty, is going to work. So there's no reason to change how it is loaded. But I think you'll have a slightly higher percentage if you do get it in this way. So I would try to human load it in this way. But of course, if it goes in wrong, I'm still just going to go and score it. I'm not going to waste time doing anything else. Because if you think about it, if you go up and you miss one, and you just miss like 1 out of 5 or 1 out of 6, the time that you spent like jiggling to get it to sit nice and flat is very close to the amount of time it would have taken to just spit it out and go back and get another one. So you're not gaining that much there if you're only missing occasionally. Once you get to the point where you're missing like half your shots or a third of your shots, that's a big problem, and you need to spend a little more time figuring that out. All right, then we learned if there's a piece already in there, I think it gets even more important to get close, and I think the sideways works even better, but we needed that higher power to get it to pop over the top. So I like having the 2 powers, but I do like going for this direction, and your driver practicing and getting lined up as nicely as possible on the line seems to be the most important thing for scoring repeatably here. Then, at the human player station, we learned that if the robot is flat against it, it's really easy to just roll this in. But as it moves away, if there's an angle and it's bumping and stuff like that, you aim for whichever side is closer. So if this side is closer in and it's tipped away, so that is away from the wall, if you try to roll it down on this side, you still have a chance of getting it in. And if you start higher on the ramp, it'll roll farther. And you can even push it to get more force to go in. And it looked like almost no matter how hard you kind of threw it in here, it's still going to go in and it's still going to stick. And even if you throw it in and it sort of bounces off this and hits this, like there's still a really good chance it still stays. So I feel pretty good about that as well. But this is a thing that your human player rather should practice, being able to throw this into the robot with varying amounts of force to make sure that they can compensate for however it parked in position over there. Because again, if it just parks and stops and the human player gets it in and you leave, that is going to save you a ton of time. If it parks over there and the human player is like, nah, you got to adjust a little bit, and the driver tries to adjust and they over-adjust and the human player is still not good, you can waste a bunch of time just sitting there trying to get lined up. So if the human player can fix some of that misalignment, that's going to help your driver out. And then, of course, your driver should practice getting it in there nice and flat as well. All right, so I think we added some extra good things in teleoperated mode, the ability to kind of have two different powers so we can score if needed when there's already a game piece there. The other thing that we should talk about is there's only so much room on this shelf. I think you can get maybe 3 across. You can maybe do 6 of them on this shelf. After that, you're going to have to score somewhere else. And that means you're going to have to start scoring in areas that aren't as easily accessible. Maybe the other side, which is facing the other human player, and the front, your teammate's already filled up. So you should spend some time also taking the robot around to the back side of the goal and practicing that. And you'll see, too, from the driver station, like it's hard to see what you're doing because you're looking through all of this stuff. So practicing scoring on the back, hard to see places, could be helpful. But also, if you think about it, like if you're scoring, if you know in your practice time, you do a 2 minutes and 15-second practice session, and you're only scoring like 5 or 6, well, then you probably can fit them all on 1 or 2 sides of the hexagon. But the flip side to that, too, is if you're 100% when there's no other pipe in the way, when there's no other coral piece in the way, but it drops down to like 60% when there is one in the way because all the bouncing and stuff, then it might be worth going to open spots and using some of the blind sides of the field. The other thing that I have to point out on the field, too, is in the middle. All right, so in the middle of the field, there are, well, first of all, we talked about being able to score on the backside here. But across the middle, there are, I guess this is the barge zone, but there are these cages that you can hang from. And there are many of them, right? So there are, I think, 1 for each team. So there's 6 of them going across the middle of the field. But something to keep in mind is these things, like, and this one has some wood, and the chain adds some weight, but this is like beefy. This is 20 pounds or so, and this is steel. So we know how fast our robot goes. If we take our robot and we go full speed, we are about to smash basically a wrecking ball into the roller on our robot. That's bad. This is probably the most fragile piece of the robot to hit. So that's not good. And remember, there's 2 heights. So this is the high height, which is perfect to basically decapitate our robot. The low one has other problems as well. So if we go through the low one, it starts out nice with bumper contact. But as we keep going, that is now basically dragging again on our roller. And to make matters worse, if you do drive through it, and you drive through it fast, you're going to end up with this thing in the middle of the field that is swinging around like this that you have to drive through. And that also could be very dangerous for your robot. So we got to be very, very careful with these things. Also, to keep in mind, when you go to potentially hang on these. So that's another thing that we need to talk about is this robot right now can do that auto mode, can score, you should have multiple auto modes. It can human load and continually score on level 1 of the reef. But there is room on this robot. We got a lot of room underneath. We got room on the sides to be able to put stuff, and a little bit of room on the back. And you can use that room if you still have time in the season to do additional tasks. Now, I do think being able to score the coral pieces at higher levels is not an easy transition from this robot. Also, being able to pick them up off the floor seems like not an easy transition for this robot. But there are a couple of things that you might be able to package in here, and one of them is the ability to hang. So if there were something on your robot, that was on the sides, you might be able to have that device, or maybe it comes up over the middle. You might be able to have that device where you can drive in and grab onto this cage and lift up. And I know there are a lot of teams out there. There are teams doing Open Alliance. There are teams doing what they call Robot in 3 days, where they try to rush through and build a robot. And they have some examples of how they're hanging. So you can check that out. Sometimes even some of the vendors will have packages that you can use to help get you started on that. And I think EveryBot is another group that last year started with the Kitbot and then added some enhancements to it, so they might be doing that again this year. Check that out. But if you do go to hang, one of the things to watch out for is this one, it swings around a lot, so you are going to have something that is willing to drive into that and take those hits to be able to locate, to grab on, to lift. But the other one, the short one over here, man, if this one is going, if somebody drives through this and it's going, that is going to be, I mean, I don't know how you get that very easily to stop it. This one, if you do the same thing, just because the chain is so much shorter, it's still basically in the same area, right, to go to grab onto, but this one is like all over the place. And it will do this for a while as it moves back and forth. So that is something to keep in mind if you start looking at some of those hanging designs. Another thing that would probably be pretty easy to do on this robot, because you could have just maybe a small arm on the side. You could have something that comes out of maybe the back of the robot. And remember the other game piece there, those algae pieces, the kickballs that are in here. You could probably have something that goes in and knocks it out to clear it out of the way for your team. And maybe you could even have something that goes out and grabs onto it. So you can try to score and control that as well. Because that could work just off the sides. And remember, if you need some of the space where some of the components are, like, hey, robot signal light is in the way, this is a problem. Well, it's just 2 holes and 2 rivets. Drill them out, find another place to put the robot signal light, move it down here, move it over here, wherever you want, and reattach it where it's not in the way. Same thing with the radio. You can move the radio. The radio should be mounted, though, on one of these metal bars, because the aluminum will help heat sink the radio. The radio tends to heat up, so it's nice to have somewhere where that heat can get absorbed into and spread out. So those are a couple of ideas. Again, do this as an iterative approach. Get the robot so it's driving. Get the robot so you can score the coral. Get those auto modes working. Get the first auto mode working, get the second auto mode working, and work your way up. And as people are working on those things and completing those things, then you should start thinking about what else can we add to this robot. Can we do a hanger? Can we do maybe one of the ball scoring devices or holding devices and attach it onto this? And if you work to where you build this and it works, when you go to your first event, you're going to have something that is going to let you play the game. This robot, especially in early weeks, because of how fast it should be able to run back and forth and score those level 1s, it should be able to put up a decent number of points. So if they're more complicated robots, but they're still fixing them, they're still debugging them, even if they can score higher for more points, you might be able to keep up just through sheer throughput of stuff. So it can be very competitive early if you have it ready, if your drivers are very, very good and practiced. So focus on those things first, and then what else can you add? Try to add more functionality to it as the season goes on. Remember, it's like 6.5 weeks or something till the first week of events. If your event is later, you have more time till your first event. But you can keep working on your robot up until your last event, up until Worlds, if you make it all the way to Worlds. So never stop trying to add stuff or improve or practice or tweak your program to make things run better. All right, so if you got the robot built this far and you've got those auto modes working, that's a pretty good job. But again, keep trying to improve throughout the entire season. Well, this is the end of Kitbot 2025 for the Virtual Robotics Studio. Hopefully the videos were helpful for you. We had a lot of fun making them. Good luck at the competition. And one more time before we go, we got to give one last special thanks to Argosy for making this all possible, to First and Andymark for parts and support, and to Team 302 Lake Orion High School for hosting our studio.